I don't need to be told by you about the importance of free speech. And I was really struck by the kind of froideur with which he said it. You know, he was not a happy man.
They're not used to this kind of thing.
But I mean, the other thing that struck me about the Mail on Sunday headline is that, if anything, that will embolden Leveson to do more, because it plays into exactly what we're looking at here, which is exaggerations.
Is he being criticised or is he being undermined?
More criticised than undermined. And I do find it surreal that you would respond to criticisms of being uncommitted to free speech by calling up the Cabinet Secretary and trying to close down one of your...
There's an irony there, really, isn't there?
It's beyond irony. I'm stunned that he thought that this wouldn't come out in some form as well and reflect badly on him. But I think Rowena is right, that as bad as this week has been for the Prime Minister, the big problem is yet to come, which is what will Leveson recommend as far as regulation goes, and how does the government respond to it? Because whichever way it goes, it will alienate and infuriate some parts of the media.
Well, let's come to the Prime Minister's, their performance. The consensus, I suggest, but see if you agree, is that Mr Brown did not enhance his reputation. Mr Major did, and David Cameron was doing fine until that amazing text of "Yes, you can."
To be fair on David Cameron, it's not his fault that he received such a text. But I mean, I think the real drama...
We're all in this together.
The real drama was with Gordon Brown. I mean, we have to remember this is a former Prime Minister who point blank denied that he was preparing to call a snap election at the very time that there were a bunch of limousines going round Parliament Square waiting to pick up ministers to send them out to the country to begin the campaign. And so it didn't incredibly surprise me to see him being, well, slightly economical. I don't know with the truth, perhaps that's not entirely fair.
I thought this week we saw the very best and the very worst of Gordon Brown. So
where was the best bit?
The best was when he was talking about his child, when he was talking with genuine morality and movement about, you know, a genuine feeling, I think, and a genuine love that we cannot question for his child. But the very worst was when you get this almost pathological sense of, I mean, it must be lying. From the sources that I'm talking to, what he's saying is simply not true. And the really scary thing is he seems to believe it himself when he's talking.
But if a woman like Rebecca Wade did that to your child and splashed your child's problems all across the front of a tabloid, would you then invite her to slumber parties and go to her wedding?
Well, apparently Sarah Brown is the most forgiving person in the world. That's Gordon Brown's explanation.
Do we have any evidence of that?
Well, a lot of journalists would suggest quite the opposite, that she's actually quite tough, understandably tough, in defence of her family. I thought what was remarkable about this week is that all the prominent people who appeared before Leveson gave perfectly characteristic performances, in the sense that Cameron is often piqued and rattled when under intense questioning, a little bit irritable. Gordon Brown thinks there are no limits to people's credulity. John Major is actually quite a kind of a dignified person. George Osborne can be quite compelling when he expounds on politics and the game of politics.
He came across quite well.
I think he did at the beginning of the week. And Ed Miliband, I thought, was very good, because his job was to not cause any fuss at all, so the pressure remained on the government, and he did that by not saying very much.
Well, I agree with you to all extents, apart from with Cameron, because I have to say I was expecting a slightly more polished performance. I mean, when we started this series, I remember you saying that Cameron stands like a kind of colossus over Parliament, and actually what we saw here, a man who's quite defensive, quite on the back foot, quite disorganised, actually. And those texts, I think, were damaging. I mean, the narrative that Miliband's pushing is that this Prime Minister is now tainted, and this will continue throughout and beyond after Leveson.
I agree, but that is characteristic of Cameron. Even at Prime Minister's questions, under intense questioning, he does become irritable, visibly irritable.
But somebody is lying under oath. Both Mr Murdoch and Mr Brown cannot be right about this phone call. Both Mr Brown and all the Blairites cannot be right about the dogs of war being unleashed by Mr Brown. Somebody has lied under oath.
I think one significant point is that Peter Mandelson, in his evidence, did recall a conversation between Rupert Murdoch and Gordon Brown about exactly the issue that Brown claims was never discussed. So something doesn't stack up here.
What's really worrying is that you know that people are lying under oath because these positions are inconsistent, but actually no one has yet been speared by Leveson, and it's very unlikely that anyone will again. And that, I think, is going to be quite damaging for public relations with the politicians.
I mean, it should be said in Brown's defence, on the question of whether whether his allies briefed against Tony Blair, he didn't say no, he said, I would hope not. which is mealy-mouthed.
It was
but it's not-
utterly
but it's
unconvincing,
not a-
really,
it's-
wasn't it? I
it's
mean,
not a
even
denial.
he didn't look convinced. He was kind of playing with his ear and looking down. But for me, that was the most jaw-dropping moment when he was saying that.
And I always thought the main phone call was made to Mr. Murdoch at the party conference when the Sun was dumping him, but we've run out of time. Thank you. That's all for this week. Joe Coburn will be back on BBC Two tomorrow at noon with an action-packed daily politics. I'll be back next Sunday at the earlier time of 11 o'clock here on BBC One. Remember, if it's Sunday, it's the Sunday Politics.